If you've ever thought to yourself, I'd rather just read about this than actually do it, you're not alone. The Enneagram 5 newsletter exists to help you move from knowing to experiencing. Every Saturday, you'll get insights designed to help fives grow without overwhelm. Sign up for free today at enneagram5.com/newsletter or visit the link in the description. Now on to the show. So Cody.
Yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how batshit crazy am I?
I think it really depends on the day. I would say you're like a solid 6 most days. Every once in a while you can creep up to 8 or 9 though.
I'm an Enneagram 5. All right. Well, we're talking about one of my favorite subjects.
And one of my least favorite subjects.
Yeah, which is conspiracy theories.
Yay.
Okay, so I texted Cody this morning and I said, I think it's time for the conspiracy theory episode. You said you were dreading that. So
yeah,
I decided that it would be a good idea to just, let's start with unpacking that. Why are you dreading this conversation?
I mean, I don't know if that, I guess we can start there. A lot's happened in the last few years.
This is true.
And a lot's happened in the world and philosophy of conspiracy theories and theorists. And there's been a lot of direct influence thrown around in different groups and different opinions that it caused a lot of people, myself included at one point in time, to get very sensitive, maybe is the right word. And I think that it's a topic that has, I mean, I feel like there was at one point I wasn't sure if our friendship was going to withstand the debates about conspiracy theories because of how sensitive of a topic it was for a while.
There was a period of time after we started the podcast, actually, where we didn't know if we were going to continue being friends. I think both of us at different times were wondering that.
Was that in did we record season 2 during that time, or was it 3?
It started right after we recorded season 1,
okay.
And so kind of went through season 2.
Yeah, God.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the reasons why it took so long for us to get to season 2, was because I had started to withdraw a bit, I think, as I was processing some of that.
Well, yeah, and same.
Yeah.
I mean, I withdrew as well. I was trying to process the world and how I felt about things, and I mean, it was a hard time.
There was one point where I was like, I feel like we might be heading towards a civil war, and I don't know if Cody and I will be on the same side.
Yeah, I mean that's possible. I guess that could have happened. Yeah. It's so. I mean, I guess in some ways, I'm not one to just dive headfirst into conflict. So maybe that's. I mean, if I'm going to sum up this conversation, not that I necessarily think it's going to be a conflict now, because I can healthily get to a place where I can just agree to disagree. And that's fine. But yeah, there was a time where that was not so much the case. And especially with the whole COVID thing and all that, and me having COVID and having it so bad, I think that definitely affected the way that I saw or was emotionally, personally feeling affected by a lot of the conspiracy theories around vaccines and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that had a lot to do with it at the time. Whereas now I've had COVID 3 times. So it's a little different, and not in the world. Well, I won't say the world isn't as scary as it was back then. It's not as in your face, visceral. It's now just a lot of noise of scary rather than this one thing everybody was focusing on. So, yeah, I've got other things to worry about.
Okay, so to kind of sum up, I think that if I could put words in your mouth while you're drinking your wine, is it fair to say you were dreading it because it was more about sort of our past conflict around it? Or are you just not wanting to talk about, like, is there still some emotional baggage that comes along with it, I guess?
Honestly, I would say that it's more of kind of speaking to being a 5. It's actually more has to do with the fact that I am feeling a little ill-equipped to have this conversation in a way in which, depending on how you go, like, I don't know how you're going to talk about it. First of all, we have not discussed, we never do.
We haven't.
Ever
That's
discuss.
the fun part of this. I like throwing them curveballs.
Right. And so, like, for me, there is no way for me to prep. And so, but in this particular instance, it means you have all the power. You hold the power because you know where the conversation's going to go. You're going to lead it. So I don't know how to defend it. I don't know if I disagree with you.
Yeah.
I'm a processor. I need time to process and think through my responses. And so, like, I think honestly that's what I've been dreading the most, because I know that there's probably going to be things that I feel passionately about, maybe in the opposite direction. That could happen, maybe not, but it could. And if it does, how will I be able to defend it in real time? Because I'm not good at defending in real time. So it's more of like the 5-ness inadequacy feeling.
Dude, that's so funny, because that is why I was originally dreading this conversation of, like, I have this whole, like, spider web mapped out in my head. Yeah. But I don't think I have the tools or the skills to really fully communicate it well enough to articulate it. so like, that was my,
I don't know. Once you get going, you're kind of like a train that just barrels ahead and there's no stopping it.
That was like after we
in the politics.
That's why, like, after we did the politics conversation, I was like, okay, well, I guess I kind of can once I get going. But I think that it's important for us to, the reason why I brought this up first is because I want to alleviate the pressure. Yeah. Because, honestly, I think we're probably closer on a lot of the stuff than we would think that we are on the surface. But too, like, I'm not here to try to convince you of anything. Right. And then, like, that's not what, like, the purpose of this podcast. It's not the purpose of these conversations. Like, true. I more want, like, I love things that just capture my attention and get me to think about something differently. Yeah. And I can get caught up in that. And I love sharing that with people who can also get excited about it. Just like, just imagining for a minute, like, what if it's possible, that sort of thing. And so I felt like, I think part of the struggle has been, like, on my end has been, like, I haven't felt like I could share that part of myself with you. Yeah. And so I think that that's part of, like, the root of what had put some distance between us for a while.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think a lot of it had to do, I was really specifically COVID, I think, because of the whole vaccine conversation. And I think, honestly, a lot of the reason is you might find this endearing, but one of the reasons why I think it upset me so much is because of, I knew that if you were going that direction, then obviously your family would be with you on that. And I care about your family too. So I took that personally almost for them. Like, it's like, like putting them in harm's way at that time is what I was thinking, And so it was it was personal for multiple reasons, and sure, like, the idea of abstract thought and thinking about things from different vantage points and considering possibilities that aren't necessarily the popular possibilities I'm not against those things. I think it's harder for me, and I'm sure we'll cross these lines in the conversation. It's harder for me when certain belief systems tend to break down. It breaks down what is fact and truth, and how do we, if you start taking that idea apart, then how do we do anything? Why do we have anybody why do we have professionals of anything? Because if you're not going to listen to them, then that doesn't matter. So anyway, but yeah, we can get into that. I think I'm probably jumping ahead.
Well, I don't want to, I don't want to come across as, like, I'm not trying to make an argument for any one position on any individual topic. I think that the where I wanted to take this conversation was just more of a philosophy of conspiracy theories. Okay, well, let me ask you this. What do you think of conspiracy theories in general?
It's hard. It's hard because we were just told that aliens are real. So,
well, we're going to get into that. Actually,
I'm sure we are. But like because of that reality and that just happened, that's a conspiracy theory that was a conspiracy theory for so long. Sometimes, I don't know. There's schools. I would say there's two schools of conspiracy theories. Some that are, and I think. I'm getting ahead of myself in my brain before my mouth can say the words, but there's like, what's the word? Benevolent conspiracy theories.
Okay. So yeah. And malevolent. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's some conspiracy theories that don't really necessarily bring harm to anybody, and you can believe them and you can look into them and you can find them fascinating and interesting and it's like fine. But then there's others that if the right person says the right conspiracy theory with the right audience and the right platform, it can do tons of harm to tons of people. And so trying to draw that line is where I'm like, I can have fun with the idea of certain conspiracy theories, but then there's a certain point where I have to draw the line and go, okay, but like, are we hurting anybody by saying these things, right? I would think that on this podcast because we have enough downloads that I would be a little concerned about it. Saying this is true and this is why we know this, and then a ton of people going out and doing something stupid. So like, I don't know. I think about it in that way too, like how it affects people, because a lot of things that I have read in pieces throughout the last year or so, because at this point, I think I've always been a psychology nerd and why people, just patterns of humanity. I think that's really fascinating. Yeah. And so the idea behind why people believe in conspiracy theories are really fascinating to me. So I've read in some pieces of like different studies that have been done across the board in different schools of thought on that, and why some people, try to argue why conspiracy theories are dangerous in general. And then some people, instead of trying to attack that question, look at like why people want to, like why is society so into distrust and post-truth era, right? Like how did we get here? And so I think there's a lot of like, a lot of things coming to a head all at once. That's kind of like creating this perfect storm of thought.
Yeah. I've heard you use that term a few times of post-truth era. What do you mean by that?
The idea that entering into a time in society in which we now have so much information and people are having a harder time. Everybody can get so much information individually that they get to just now decide what information is true or not, rather than, and granted, there's pros and cons to having people tell you what's true and not, obviously, but there's so much information from all different sides all the time. And for that reason, it's kind of like broken down what society can now determine is true or not true, and has created a environment in which people can decide for themselves what is true and make entire decisions based on that. Or it's I think the craziest part of the post-truth era for me is that because nothing can be defined as true to any group of people, it's way easier to deceive everybody. Like it's a politician's playground right now. And it has been for a while. And post-truth era has been discussed in certain kind of, I guess, philosophical and definitely political science circles for a while now. Before there was a group of political scientists who were talking back in the 90s of being concerned of this rise of authoritarianism in the U.S. And they talked about the post-truth era. I think they I don't know if they coined the term, but they were talking about it back then in some of their books and different papers they released. And they said that like once the post-truth era once we go through that process, which most people believe happened around the time of 9/11,
okay,
that it was creating, it basically paved the way for someone like, Donald Trump to be president. Like it basically like was written in the stars for him a while ago because of the progress of society through this idea of the internet and creating for ourselves this idea of like, yeah, just post-truth in general. And so like, it's an interesting, I guess, conversation and thought to be able to try to like decide where where does that end? To what point where do we go as a society after that? Like, if we can't trust when, if somebody who's been studying a thing for their entire life and has multiple degrees in it in all different places tells you that this thing is true, and you go, no, it's not. Well, why is it not true? Because I said so. Okay, but I have this much experience and I have proven it many times. It's not true though, because I don't listen to you. And so, like, that's just kind of where we are now.
So it's more about tribalism then, in that sense?
It could be. I mean, definitely it's fueled. I would say it's definitely been like the kindling of all like polarizing political conversation for sure. And like the tribalism that's happened with polarization, it's kind of now been so melded together that I was actually reading something the other day about where they were saying that like people sometimes fake believing in conspiracy theories just so they can fit in with the tribe that they want to believe in politically. Yeah, so people just like they'll fake believe in conspiracy theories. Even if they don't necessarily believe in them, they'll just be like all in on them because everybody that they have aligned themselves with politically believe in it, which is the most insane thing ever. Like, I don't know. I get it. Like, all of us have fallen victim to this kind of thought process and just like tribalism at one point in time in our lives, or many, many times, and probably still do all the time. I constantly have to check myself on like what I think or feel, and I'm like, what influenced these thoughts? Like at this point, I'm pretty much just 24/7 got something rolling in the back of my brain, like checking all of my thoughts to see if it's like been influenced by things, because everything's influenced by everything, right? So, and like companies and ads and everything take advantage of us being so malleable these days by, this like seated distrust that's happened of all things, corporation and anything organized, that we, they just feed into that and sell us shit. So it's just like, we're in a rough time right now, really. Everything's against us individually.
So how do you think we should respond to conspiracy theories as a society then?
This is the thing. Like, it isn't like I think it should just be like eradicated. I think that we should all be allowed to question anything. We should all, because we naturally do. And if I would say that I was against that, then I would be the evil that I hate so much in religion, right? Like, don't question that, like, because you don't want to see what's behind the curtain. And so I'm not against the idea of questioning a system or a corporation or a society or whatever. I think that it's trying to, I feel like at this point in my life, I'm more humanity centered than I've ever been, which I think we can agree on and be.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
So I wish that we could be in a place as a society where we could both collectively and individually come together and get into a place where we can have hard conversations and decide for ourselves and together if something is kind of crazy, and like maybe this isn't something that like should be entertained because of the dangers of going down that road. Or I don't know. I mean, this is kind of an interesting thought. Let's pull at that thread and see where that takes us. I think that being able to decide for ourselves and collectively as a community where that line is drawn without one burning the building down, like deciding like, just like screw everything, like it doesn't matter. And so the polarization, the whole like 100% black or white, I think that it's the extreme feeling both directions that, I know that's not the really way to say it, like amygdala is being triggered, right? Like thinking frontal, like all emotional and all feelings, which we all do all the time, but like letting that rule how we dictate our relationships, how we dictate conversations that aren't necessarily life or death. Like it's kind of crazy how that happens so much now with everybody, that you have to constantly be so worried about what you're going to say with any one particular group because of what fire that might ignite. And that I kind of wish, that's actually the thing that I wish we could eradicate, honestly. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Wait, hold on. What is the thing you want to eradicate?
Polarization. To the point where it's like so tribal, where it's like, you are the enemy because you don't agree with me.
Yeah.
not because you're right or wrong or because of whatever. At this point, I don't think anybody necessarily cares that much if they're right or wrong. I think that they just care if people agree with them. And I don't know if I don't know. That seems like a more dangerous idea to me, that people are okay with being wrong as long as they're not alone in the wrongness. Because I don't think that's like the top of mind thing. I think it's so tribal. It's so collective. It's such a hive mind thing now that everybody just kind of wants to be together on something, which is kind of romantic in a way. I like to think of it that way, but it's just in all the wrong ways.
Yeah. I'm curious where that sense comes from.
Sense of what?
The sense of people don't really care if they're right or wrong. They just want to be right or wrong together. Like, is that something that you're experiencing personally in your day to day, or is that something that you're gleaning kind of from what you view of society as a whole?
I would say it's a little of both. I think that, we live in the South. I know a lot of people that very much define themselves one side or the other in extremes, right? Like, I know people who are far left and far right. I know people that are more center in their overall philosophy, but politically, or their just general day-to-day leanings. And I think that it's become this thing that I've seen it in, video clips and interviews with people, and just the crazy things that people will say, right? And I've also seen it. That would be one thing where I would be like, oh, they're just picking the extremes. But I've seen it in my life. I've seen people say things where I'm like, really? you okay. How? How do you believe these things? And, I heard a guy just the other day say that he doesn't trust mainstream media. And I'm like, gotcha. Yeah, I'm with you. Like, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, where do you get your news? And he's like, Q. Okay. So you get it from somewhere. And it's also heavily biased. And so, and that then my mind automatically labeled him as somebody who could be dangerous because they could be getting fed information that might be violent. And so, it's just, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Wrong or right is not something someone's asking themselves, I think, at this point, because everything is so. And of course, this is just my opinion. This is just observation. This is me processing it out loud in real time. But I wonder if because of the speed at which we ingest information, we don't stop long enough to think about if it's right or wrong. We just let it influence us. And so before we know it, we're just our subconscious level is just deciding that was fact. What we took in, what we saw, that's fact, right? Like, that's what politicians intend on when they put, their opponent's name against a bunch of flashy, terrible, negative images and like bad words, right? They just assume that even if you're for them, you might vote for them. Something's in your brain now that like connects those negative images and words to that person, and it totally works all the time. And some of it's true, some of it's not. It doesn't matter because now it's in your brain. They planted those seeds and now they're just watering them. And I think the people who know what they're doing know that people aren't stopping long enough to process whether it's a fact or not. It's just in your brain now. And you move on to the next thing so fast that it's just like, it's literally just planting all of these seeds.
It's like subconscious programming.
100%. Yeah. We're just constantly being rewired to believe whatever it is other people want us to believe. And whoever has the most money to be able to make the things that they're in front of our eyes, whether it looks like somebody posting something on Instagram or if it's a full-on ad or commercial on TV, right? It's all the same.
So what do you do about that?
The guy that I'm recording my album with is, he built his house from the ground, ran all of his own water and electricity, is not dependent on anyone, and probably do what he did. I think that's the only way.
So remove yourself from society.
Remove yourself from society where you're not dependent on anything or anyone, so you don't have to care about
such
life.
A 5 answer.
Oh my God. I'm excited to go record there because for that reason, I just get to stay off the grid for a while.
I want to come with you.
You should.
Yeah.
I think the number one conspiracy theory that I believe is that the media does not have our best interest at heart, and that you have to seek out more sources that you can rely upon in order to get the full story.
I think most conspiracy theories are wrong, but that doesn't mean that they're automatically wrong. One theory that I favor is the existence of some kind of global leadership, such as the Illuminati. I think it would be a miracle if we're all still here, if there truly is no group at the helm.
Yeah, I get that. In terms of technology, I was a huge techno geek for so much of my life.
Yeah.
I remember
A lot of why I am is because of you, actually. We've known each other that long.
in my first job, I was so bored because I was there full time, but I had like 10 hours of work a week to do, really.
Yeah.
So I spent the rest of my time like watching tutorials and learning skills, and also just like relentlessly researching stuff, mostly tech stuff. And I remember sitting there and like refreshing the Engadget webpage, like the homepage on it, like every 10 minutes, just to see if they posted any new articles on any new gadgets. And I like would consume it, and I knew everything about every new gadget that was coming out, even if I had like, it was, cameras before I got into photography and like stupid things like that. I knew all the specs, and I knew how to help someone like decide between this and that, and like based on what they needed. And it was just ridiculous, but I would get just obsessed with it. Yeah.
What's crazy too is to think about that at one point in time, content moved slow enough that you were waiting on it and refreshing.
It's so true.
Because like there's so much content on anything you can, if you know how to ask the right question in Google, you can find anything. Like today when I bought an electric guitar, and I was comparing like 5 different electric guitars, and I found multiple videos where people had decided to compare in a demo, playing side by side, the 5 guitars I was looking for. Like, how is that possible? Because there's that much content.
So I'm gonna edit that statement that you made too. If you know how to ask the right questions, you can find anything in Google that the globalists want you to be able to find.
I don't even know if I know what that means necessarily. They wanted me to find those videos of the 5 guitars.
No, I'm half joking, just on the state of censorship in the internet today as well. We haven't had a lot of conversation about this, but I've kind of become a free speech absolutist over the last couple of years.
What does that mean exactly?
Meaning that any attempt to limit speech, even if it's with good intentions, creates a leverage point for people in power, no matter what you do. Yeah. And so even if it starts out good, it will get captured. And so I am, and so what that means is that like free speech means that you're gonna come across things that are ugly and things that you find abhorrent, unfortunately. And there are limitations in terms of like, obviously we have clear boundaries around things like inciting violence and, that sort of thing, but that are already, like, we have laws that make them illegal. But
right.
In terms of just things that, aren't illegal, but you find completely abhorrent as a human being, that's the price that we pay for having free speech. Because what's worse is when we start putting censorship mechanisms in place, because then we end up in a much more dystopian situation than if we let those things be out in the open, and then we can address them directly.
Right. It kind of goes back to what I was saying about collectively being able to decide if one particular philosophy is a dangerous philosophy or not. We have to. We if we never hear those things, we can't even decide those things.
So I want to go back to this. This kind of, you said this, and I want to bring it back around to conspiracy theories, and I want to pause it and see what you think of this.
Okay.
There are no good or bad conspiracy theories. It's all about how you use them.
Yeah, I don't. You're gonna have to really convince me of that thought to like even be able to entertain it, because I don't think I agree with you. But I'm interested in hearing what you mean by that. I'll say that much. I'm distracted. There is a social media platform, I can't remember what it's called, where no one person owned it and they didn't censor anything. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What was it called?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's
It's still around.
There's Nostr that.
No, it's not that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's a lot of new social media that tends to pop up, but because they don't have the network effect, all the fringe people go there. So like you're only seeing fringe.
Yeah.
And so then you just get extremes of everything.
Well, at
and then
first-
no one else wants to go there.
Honestly, the thing about it is like it never really got that crazy to me. Like, there might have been like some nudity and stuff, but like most of it was like it ended up being like the one that I'm thinking of. I wish I could remember the name. It ended up being like a massive community of artists. It was just creatives that got on there.
Oh, cool.
And that was not what they intended, I don't think. I think they wanted it to be just a normal social media platform. But artists went there because they could post all of their art, no matter what it was, without being censored. And so like there was a lot of people that did like, there's a lot of like portrait nude photography that's happening right now and has for a long time. But I feel like it's like really big right now. And everybody's becoming like some type of, what's it called? Boudoir? Bordeaux?
Boudoir.
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 They're all those photographers now, and so like everybody's doing like lingerie and nude photography, and there they can post it all, and it's just art, and then people consider it art, like they just all liked it or commented on the artistry of it, and it ended up just when I was on it, I was like, it actually kind of got boring, like because it was not censored at all, and I'm not arguing for censorship at all. I agree with you. But I think that there's a point to be made there that like if all the censorship was taken away, would we as a community on any particular platform be able to just like disregard the stuff that comes across too intensely or if it's violent or dangerous or whatever? We could decide that for ourselves. We don't need somebody deciding it for us.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is like. And this is the part where I don't think I really got into this too much when we talked about politics. I've come around to land on, I won't say land, hover in certain areas that make me sound like a right winger.
Yeah. I thought that. I've been editing the politics podcast right now, and I'm like, man, you sound so right wing.
And but that's the crazy thing is like, I'm not. There are some things that probably I land more on that side, but there are some things that like I land way on the other side, and that was sort of the point of that conversation for me. Is I've especially over the last couple of years felt really politically homeless because I don't fit in either camp, and I'm not the type of person who joins a team, especially a stupid team like either one of the ones that we have.
Right.
And so like coming back around to what I was saying in terms of like. There are no good conspiracies or bad conspiracies. It's all about how you use them. Maybe I can unpack a little bit my philosophy or my approach to conspiracy theories.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so my sort of thesis is we all need to believe in more, not less, conspiracy theories.
Yeah, you said this to me before. Now's your chance. Make the argument.
And I call it the New Girl method.
Okay. You're gonna have to make like a document so we can release this in the community.
Okay, so it all comes from this episode of New Girl. If you haven't seen the show, there are two characters, Jess and Schmidt. And
there's more than two characters.
Well, yes. In this scenario, in this scene, there are two characters, Jess and Schmidt. And Schmidt is kind of a player, and he's talking to all these girls on the social apps or the dating hookup apps, right? And Jess is recently out of a relationship, and so she notices that Schmidt is they're roommates, and Schmidt is bringing home a new girl like every night and all this stuff, and so she starts asking him questions about how he's finding these people to hook up with and stuff, and he tells her about these apps, and she starts asking questions, and he's like, well, this is way too advanced for you. Like, you're not ready for this.
Was this in the beginning of the show?
No, this is mid show.
Oh, okay. It's similar to the beginning.
Yeah. So she gets his phone and
okay. Yeah, I remember
and
this.
starts doing the apps like on her own, and she ends up calling him at one point. Because she gets trapped in this creepy guy's like apartment, and and so he's Schmidt is basically like you need to stay away from these. And she's like, no, I want to find somebody. And he's like, well, why didn't you leave? And she felt bad about it. Like she didn't want to tell him the truth. And she found him creepy. And so she begged Schmidt to show her how to use the app. And he finally agrees.
Yeah.
And he's like, meet me at the bar tomorrow morning. And so they go and they meet. And he starts, teaching her the principles of how to use the apps and how to interact with these random strangers and determine, whether or not they're worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And instead of setting up, letting her kind of test the waters and set up one date, he sets up 10 dates for her in that day. So he's like, in an hour comes the first date, and you're just going to have to jump in and go for it,
Okay,
right?
I remember this,
right?
Yeah.
And so so he is basically just like fire hosing her with all of these random guys that come from the app, and they're all really terrible. And so he's teaching her, training her in the moment of how to evaluate them and how to decide whether or not they're worth her time, right?
Right.
And so this. And eventually she gets to the point, and what she's trying to do is she's trying to overcome her fear of what they'll think of her. And so she finally gets to the point where she can be honest and basically, say this is, well, actually she doesn't really get very honest. She makes up an excuse because she got advice from Schmidt. But but she learns how to overcome that fear and to get herself out of that situation, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we should treat conspiracy theories. So this is my
Okay.
as crazy as that sounds, right? The reason why I say that we should believe in more and not less conspiracy theories is because I went on this journey, and I wasn't always like this conspiracy theory guy. It kind of started with the UFO stuff.
It's an easy gateway.
It is a very easy gateway, and I know we vehemently disagree on some of this stuff, and that's totally okay. But when I started learning about the history of UFOs and how far it's going back, and then I started learning about the government cover-up and all of the techniques that they were using to basically create a stigma around anyone who questioned it. And then when the COVID stuff came up, I started like sensing these red flags. I'm like, these feel like the same techniques.
Right. You're kind of primed for it.
There are narratives that are being created that don't match what I'm looking at in the data. And anytime I ask questions about it, I get called a conspiracy theorist. Something's off here.
Yeah.
And that just sort of like sent me down this rabbit hole of learning how certain things work, like how drugs get approved and how, people evaluate studies. And I know way more about that shit than I should have as a regular person because I had to learn it for myself to be able to like start to ask questions and understand and find answers and start to figure out like who actually is approaching this subject honestly versus who is approaching it from a dogmatic stance. And that is kind of going back to what you were saying earlier. I feel like so much of what gets portrayed as conspiracy theories is so skewed. Like we have this view of what a conspiracy theory is based on different things. So the way that like Hollywood portrays conspiracy theories is these people in a dark room controlling every little thing in the world, right? Which is very unrealistic. And then, the way that the media portrays conspiracy theories is these crazy, like they find the most crazy, like outlandish things. They find the most crazy, outlandish things, and then they amp that up and they promote that. And they're almost always like straw man arguments for what the sort of original position is. But they find the people on the fringe and they highlight them. And when I started learning all these techniques, I started to notice that. And then that just like got me questioning everything. Those two things together. Like I'm like, do I know anything? Like, is anything real? Is anything true that I have been told? And so I just started questioning everything. And the interesting thing that I found is like, I started letting myself believe conspiracy theories intentionally. But what I would do is, I would try one on for a little bit. And then I would try another one on for a little bit. And I would start building up a model. Like, is this true? Then I would find evidence here and here and here. And then I would start, building up these models. And then eventually I would if the model held and the model was solid or it wasn't solid, I would come across things that would break the model. I'm like, okay, well, that model is broken. So I've got to let it go. And then I move on to the next one. And I just keep doing that, right? And so what I'm doing in that process is I am reforming that habit of attaching to things, right? And so the reason why I'm saying that we just like Jess was afraid of how people would look at her if she treated them the way that she was being told to treat them. There's a fear of being seen as a conspiracy theorist, and that keeps us from there are a couple of fears here. One, being seen as a conspiracy theorist. The other is the fear of being wrong. And I think that both of those are relatable to fives, but the biggest one there is like the fear of being wrong. And the reality is like, we're always going to be wrong about shit. Yeah. Right. And it's like this fear of like feeling duped and feeling incompetent. And like, and the story behind that is like, what I had to sort of overcome was I had this idea at one point that I was too smart to be fooled. And that made me easier to be fooled.
Yeah.
And what it really was this fear of being wrong or being seen as incompetent. And so it would keep me from looking into things. And so when I started intentionally going through this process of believing in conspiracy theories to build up a model and breaking them, I was breaking down that fear and overcoming that fear to the point where there aren't things. So that practice of trying on different conspiracy theories and really like looking at them and letting myself believe them, even if it's just for a week, like try this on, see how it fits, right? When that happened, what that did for me was it broke that fear of being wrong or being duped.
Yeah.
And when that happened, man, that was so freeing for me, because it was like I now have, well, it did a couple of things. One, it made no topic taboo for me, which is great because I'm naturally the type of person that like if you tell me not to look into something, I'm going to go look into it.
Yeah. Right.
And so if there's especially people in power who are saying, "Hey, don't look over there," I'm going to go down over there and just see what's up. Like, why don't you want me to look over there?
Sure.
Maybe there's something, maybe there isn't. It doesn't matter to me. Like, I have no attachment to that.
Yeah.
But I want to look into it for myself because because what I started to realize was like, and building up these models and breaking them down and building up and breaking them down, I did start to notice patterns. And I did start to develop tools that allowed me to build my skills in just evaluating evidence. Because what I realized is like there are no certainties. There are only probabilities. And so I started learning that like, what are the inputs into those probabilities? Like, what is the actual evidence that is verifiable versus what is speculation? Where do we draw the lines on that? And I could hold all of that in my head, and it's not like I have to say this is true or this is not true. I can hold this sort of slate of probabilities, and as I get in new information, then I'll change that calculation, and I'm constantly doing like that's just how my brain works. And what I realized was like so much of what we're being told that is, science or whatever, is really just dogma. And I couldn't see that until I broke that fear in myself of getting it wrong. And so that was like the first part of it for me, and why I really, aside from the fact that I think conspiracy theories are fun, it was important for me to go through this process, because I had to go on that journey for myself to really get to the point where I can start to evaluate things on my own and form my own opinion. There's a a phrase. I don't know. I doubt I came up with it, but it's a phrase that sort of came into my head along this journey of like, if you can't steel man the argument or steel man the position, you don't have an opinion, you have a talking point. And I don't know if you're familiar with the straw man versus steel man, but like straw man is basically where you take someone's argument and you take the things that are like the weakest points of the argument and put that forward as if it is their argument, and then you break that down because you can easily break that down while ignoring the other parts of the argument. And then steel man is where you take someone else's argument and you basically position that argument and cover that argument in a way where someone who's on that side would agree, yes, that's a fair representation of the argument, right? And until I can do that on a subject, and then be able to articulate, where I stand in relation to that, I don't have an opinion. I have a talking point because I've been handed the other side of it, and I don't know if that's a straw man, or I don't know, like, and that's and to your point, like, that is so hard to do these days because there's so much information. But there's also a great opportunity because if you're able to start to do the work, what I've found is like, I found my own sort of methodology where it's like, there's no one source of truth. I go to a variety of people and things. The best way to determine the accuracy of a model is to make predictions with it and see how accurate those predictions are. Right. And that's what I started to do with some of these models, where I started to feel like, well, maybe there's something here. If this is true, then I can make some sort of prediction about kind of what comes next, and then see how that holds up. And then I'll go to other people who might hold that opinion, and I'll look at what predictions they're making. And then over time, I'll just sort of like file that away, and I'll evaluate, okay, were they right? Were they not right? And then over the course of a year or two, you start to see they called a lot of this shit. No one gets everything right.
Right.
But I think that I can trust them to a degree on this topic because I've like evaluated enough and I know where their biases are. And at least I can sort of trust them enough to get the basic points, right? But I don't take anything like fed to me, I was being like a little bit tongue in cheek because when I say that we should believe in more conspiracy theories, not less, what ends up happening in the course, if you go through this process, is that you end up not believing in anything, but you start observing everything. And that's sort of like
entertaining things rather than
that's
believing
sort
them.
of a shamanic phrase. It's like, believe in nothing, observe everything.
Yeah.
Right. But you can't really do that until you break the mechanism that we all, I think, are pretty much born into, of needing certainty and craving the predictability and belonging to a tribe. And what I found for me is this was one way that was very helpful to continue to break that down in myself. I did that on the religion side, and then and for a while I was like, because I did that here, I'll never get duped again.
Right.
Which is a dangerous place to be in.
Yeah.
And so when I started coming across things that challenged my worldview and the model that I built up, rather than placing them in a category of like, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory, like, what is the steel man for this? And the interesting thing about that is, like, I've done that for several different what we would call conspiracy theories. And what's interesting is the version, if there's a conspiracy theory that kind of makes it to mainstream news, like the version of that conspiracy theory is a complete straw man, like ridiculous sort of version of it.
Sure.
When you trace it back and look, there's actually, I don't know if it's true, I don't know if it's not true, but there's actually enough evidence there that it's reasonable to ask questions about this and try to find out more information.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that people try to tell me not to do that, the more I want to do it. So it's like, that's as best I can. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but like, that's how I think about conspiracy theories now, is like, I view them as a useful tool. And if there are any dangerous conspiracy theories, they're dangerous to the people in power, because they are using that term as a sort of a weapon to keep people from looking into things. That's what I found.
I kind of laugh at people who have conspiracy theories sometimes because of what they believe. I guess as far as conspiracy theories go, I think a lot of it is just bunk. I mean, some of it is just like people get hyped up and they want to find every hidden corner in everything. And I look at it, I'm like, really? Are you serious? It's like, do you just not look at facts? Do you just believe that this is true without even taking some account of it? But in some cases, I will look at things and I'll look at the past facts, because in some situations and in some circumstances, things that could initially seem as conspiracy theories could actually be proved as factual. So, the idea of being poisoned by your water by the government, yeah, I mean, if you look at what's in the water and if you've seen the reports of them testing the water and the percentage of how much goes into the water of certain ingredients, then yeah, it's not a conspiracy theory anymore, it's factual. But if you're asking if I believe in Bigfoot or aliens or something else that is less quantifiable, unless I have experienced it myself, I usually don't see it as I don't get involved with conspiracy theories. I either believe it because it's factual and I see it, or I look at it and I think, well, maybe it's not proven, but I need more facts to make my decisions. Now, if it's proven to me and I get a sense of, yeah, that's true, then it's no longer a conspiracy theory to me, it's true.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I guess that is true. But I mean, like,
Do you know where the term conspiracy theory came from?
I do. I just don't remember. I can't remember at this exact moment. I have read it though. I've heard of the whole like origin of that phrase. But
So supposedly,
tell everybody. Let's tell everybody.
Supposedly, I don't think this was the first sort of instance of it, but the term was really coined and popularized by the CIA to keep as a label for people who were questioning the JFK assassination.
Oh, okay.
And I think that there is plenty of evidence at this point to ask some serious questions about that.
Yeah, especially some of the declassified information that's been released.
Exactly. And the fact that they haven't declassified everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. In terms of information, I think going back to censorship, we should be presented with all information. I think if we've learned anything from being told that from one person from a high up position that probably knows things and has seen things that we have not, that aliens are real, I think that and seeing how everybody reacted to it.
Yes.
That's how I'm like, we should be told everything because we are so desensitized that we should be able to have all of it.
And this is really important. I think we need to kind of drill into this a little bit.
Hang on, before we move too far past your process here,
my new girl method.
Your new girl method. I want to say this actually kind of goes back around full circle to what I was saying earlier in terms of like, I think it's okay to question things individually. I even can applaud the process to some degree. I think that where it becomes dangerous is when that process is done in isolation. I think that the way that the scientific community handles when somebody says this thing, hey, I've been doing all these tests, we're doing all this research, I have all this data, this thing's happening. And then they have to prove it to everybody. Everybody has to witness and observe the same thing, the same outcome from all these different perspectives. And then they have to attack it and poke holes in it. And go, okay, well, what about all these other things? Have you thought about all this stuff? Oh, no, I didn't think about that. Let's go back and look at that. And this peer review process of the community of all these people who are all, they all have their own experience and their own expertise in this. Go, oh, well, I don't know. Like, well, let's look at it this way. I think that there's something that you could take from that community where, like, there's the peer review. You can say you can think all these things in your head, but there is a certain point where like it does influence you, even if you don't. We're influential people, or not influential. We're malleable by influence, and I think that you expose yourself. Everybody's different, so you expose yourself to a bunch of different conspiracy theories. You can try them on like suits, but like they always kind of like leave remnants. You're building layers upon layers of these belief systems and leaving those remnants in your brain. So I think it's important to be able to say those things, and maybe this is where you're going with this, not doing it in isolation and isolating yourself, but being able to say these things out loud without the fear of judgment, and also being able to hear other people and go, other people go, whoa, you started here and now you're way in left field. Like, let's backtrack this and see how you got there.
That's a really good point. And a lot of it I did do in isolation because I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about it. But that is a result of stigmatizing the whole like area.
Yeah.
And so like, to your point, I want to have conversations. I want to like hear opposing views and like be challenged in that, because it makes me rethink. And like my process also included like, what are the opposing views? So even if I wasn't doing it in person, I actually listened way more to the opposing views on most topics than I did the conspiracy theory views. Because honestly, there's a lot more information around the opposing views usually. And in that, I would start to ask questions, or what would end up happening was questions would be asked on the conspiracy theory side. And when I went to go find what the opposing view was, 90+% of the time, they were creating straw man arguments to the questions being asked and answering that question instead, and leaving out this other part. And I'm like, I can't. And that was the thing that drove me crazy, was creating these open loops. Like, why can't I get an answer to this question?
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I finally did get an answer, it was because the answer that I got was counter to the narrative that was trying to be pushed by the people in power, and they didn't want that answer being out there. And like, I think that's really fucked up. And I didn't know what to do with that. But then when I would try to bring this up with other people who held opposing views to me, it's like I genuinely wanted to engage in conversations, but they just couldn't even like talk about it. And they couldn't. And it reminded me of like how I was when I was in this religious bubble. And anytime someone tried to counter that, I couldn't hear it for a long time because it was so baked into my identity. And I don't want to. Like,
that's a good point though.
Yeah.
Like the religion component is a bias for or against in this type of like mode of thinking, because people who are there are some very people in power also use conspiracy theories to disseminate information and disinformation too, right? It can be dangerous in that way because they're using it against the people who are malleable to or more likely to believe in certain things.
Right. So there are a couple things I want to jump into there. The first one is the best description that I've heard for someone why conspiracy theories can be so appealing to people. It came directly from a former CIA agent that I listened to on a podcast, and he described the psychology of it is humans, like our brains are essentially prediction engines, right?
Yep.
And we don't like open loops. And so anytime there is a disconnect in the information, right, we not only question what is in that void, but we start to ask why the void is there. Yeah. And that's what we obsess over. And that's where we start like speculating over and all of that.
Yeah.
And usually that argument is used, or, that reality is like used to create an argument against believing in conspiracy theories, right? I think it's really interesting that the CIA knows this. This is part of their handbook.
Yeah.
Right? So is it possible, or is it likely that is part of the playbook of anytime there is a topic that is in danger of coming out to the public, creating open loops that will drive speculation, and then finding the wildest of that speculation and making sure that the media pushes those narratives so that they can be treated as this fringe minority, and then nobody else looks into it.
Yeah, that's possible.
Absolutely happened. That was the playbook for the UFO topic for decades.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me think it's likely that they don't just do this for UFOs. What else are they doing this with, right? And that's why, at this point, anytime I read anything, this is part of my process too of like retraining my brain, is anytime I'm like reading anything or watching anything, especially on the mainstream there, but even like independent media, right? I'm rather than taking this as, okay, they're saying this, it's a fact or it's a piece of evidence, or it's a story, right? I am thinking now, okay, this is what they want me to interpret, or this is the story they want me to. And it doesn't mean that it's true or false, but I'm like, I'm creating that layer of separation of this is just what they want me to believe or take away from this. And I can kind of put that in a box and I can say, okay, this is what they want. There may be something to it, maybe not, but I'm going to kind of put this over here. Now let's go over here to this other side and see what they want me to think about it. And oftentimes, like the truth is, or some facsimile of the truth is somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And so that was one point. And then the other point, and I want to be careful about this because I know we do have a lot of, professional scientists in the audience.
Yeah.
And this is more, and honestly, I don't think that they would probably disagree with most of this, but what you described in like the peer review process is what I thought the peer review process was. And what I found is that just like, and it's differing degrees across different fields, obviously.
Sure.
But at the worst, it is nowhere near that. And there's so many problems with the peer review process. And then when you look into the how the peer review process got started in terms of like journals and who started that, it gets real weird.
Are we talking about like the medical world, or are we talking about
it's real bad on that side.
Yeah.
But
because the medical world's all money, like it's just money. Where are people pouring money? I would imagine.
But the problem though is that it's not just isolated there. Like it's across so many disciplines, and so much of science is dictated by who gets the grants.
Right, yeah.
And to get the grant.
And who funded it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right, you've got to get the grant. Which means that you can't really step too far outside the lines or you're not going to get the grant. And so it's not, and this is where I was talking about earlier, where it's like I have this picture of conspiracy theories of like these people in a dark room controlling strings and stuff like that. It goes back to what we were talking about in the politics episode. It's just an incentive structure. If you have the ability to set up the incentive structure, like you're creating the rules of the game, you don't have to control people. They will control themselves based on the incentives of the game. Yeah. And if you set up a structure or you over time capture an industry so that you can put a structure in place that has a set of incentives that allow you to sort of, nudge the flow of things, like you're going to have a much higher probability of getting the outcomes that you want. And the people at the top, the outcomes that they want probably don't align with the outcomes that I want. And so it's just like, we have this picture, like, I mean, this is the part that really frustrates me because like, I love science and I had this picture in my head of how science is done. And most of the time, like, it's not actually done that way. By the time it gets to me, it is not science.
And that's the thing, like I've had conversations with my brother about this and like talking about like, he's like, any data you read is an interpretation of the real data.
Exactly.
Because there's no way for us to read the data. We're not in that world. And he was like, most things, if it's not my field, I don't know how to read the data. Like they write the data for scientists that are in that field. And so it's like, it's such a different language. And so then people pull these little bits and pieces and make an entire narrative out of it. And then that's what we read in like popular science or in medical journals or whatever. And like, and he would
or
even
on
agree.
fact check websites.
Or on fact check websites. Yeah. And so, I think that's definitely something to consider when talking about that kind of stuff. But I mean, in the beyond all of that, before it ever reaches us, a lot of the times, I mean, there are fields of science in which they're not necessarily beholden to a certain agenda where they're just doing tests.
Right.
I mean,
and that's what I said. It's a spectrum, and there are like there's more hard sciences and there's more soft science,
explorational science, right? Like there's that like NASA and the ocean. And
but even that, I mean, there's this trope of like science advances at the speed of funerals, right? Because what ends up happening, the way that the incentive structure is like, if you play ball, you get put in a position where basically you dictate a field, and peer review in this setting is like a weapon that is wielded of like, if you are doing something outside of, that kind of contradicts like the major players in the field, there's a good chance it's not going to get it through peer review. Or there's lots of instances of also people stealing ideas from peer review process. Yeah. There's also like the reality is like if you're a real genius and you're putting forth work that other people can't understand in your field because you're ahead of them, like they're not going to pass it because they can't understand it, but they don't want to admit they can't understand it because then they look like an idiot.
Right.
And just like the whole process, the more I dug into like learning how that process works, I'm like, there's just so many holes in it. And yeah, there's a lot that about it that is great, but what that does for me is it opens the door for variability. And in that variability, it adjusts my sort of calculation of probability of outcomes based off of like, how was this peer reviewed, and how was the study put together?
Yeah.
And I'm not, and this is the thing, like, obviously I am not a professional in this field at all. But the weird thing that has come from this is like, I would read studies and I'm like, this doesn't make sense because that seems like so one thing about me is like what I do all day is I do risk benefit analysis. Like that's basically my job. Right. So I am good at that. And I can look and I can look, part of my job is like looking at data and being able to ask questions to see if like, is this data actually telling me this or does it just look like it's telling me this? And so I started reading studies, which is very laborious.
Yeah.
I spent too much time doing that kind of shit. And I'm like, I would read the conclusion and then I would dig into it to try to understand how they came to that conclusion. I'm like, it seems like they're missing some gaps here. But my first assumption is like, I just don't understand it, right? And then this has happened, at least a half dozen times where 12 months later, another study would come out that says, oh, yes, this was wrong because of this is wrong because of that, this is what you didn't consider. And it was all the stuff that I considered. I'm like, this isn't like, why would I be, this doesn't make any sense. Like I am just like this idiot, like talking into a microphone and like doesn't know anything actually about the scientific process. Yeah. Like, but it kind of goes into like what I was getting at before is like there's so much dogma that it sort of emerges from having an institution, right? So, like science has become this massive institution and there's going to be areas where just if nothing else through sheer human ego, like dogma gets injected and people just do things because this is the way that it's done. And people stop thinking in first principles. And that's where like having an outside perspective of someone who can come in and look at the data, even if they can't understand, they can at least start asking questions that people who are immersed in this world might miss,
right? Because
it's like the curse of knowledge, right?
Sure.
And so that's when
that I guess that maybe that's where you're going. That can be applied.
Exactly. And that's the thing that like that kind of drives me crazy is like there's this whole sort of movement against this idea of like do your own homework. And it gets by the elites who are like, trust the experts, doing your own homework. Like, how could you plebs possibly like understand any of this? But there was this interaction on Twitter that was like my favorite. It was amazing.
It's X now.
Yeah. Oh God, don't get me started on that. And I'm always going to call it Twitter.
Yeah.
And there was this account called Kelly from GA. So it's this random mom from Georgia who seems like did a lot of the stuff that I did. Like something's weird here. I'm just going to like look into it and ask questions and stuff. And there was a panel of people who approved, let's see, what was it? They approved the vaccine, or they're making the case. They put together this paper to like basically make the case that the vaccine for kids was like the risk benefit analysis was in favor of implementing this. And part of their thesis was the essentially like the death rate from the disease was greater, than the risk.
The risk of death from the vaccine. Right. Yeah.
Or
side effects.
Yeah, side effects, whatever, right? And this is amazing. So she called them out and pointed out like, this is wrong, and this is wrong. right?
Okay.
And the Surgeon General of Georgia, I think of Florida or Georgia, I think, was like basically like, how dare you? You think you're smarter than this group of people, right?
Yeah.
And turns out she was right. The paper got retracted, and then a epidemiologist from Harvard retweeted the whole thing, and he was basically like, this is what happens when you essentially like get caught up in your own ego as like an expert, and you can't be open to new information. Like, this is a perfect example of it.
Yeah.
And he's like, way to go, Kelly from Georgia, because you were right.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
this is the thing, is like, I'm not saying experts don't know what they're talking about, because obviously that's
Or
dumb.
that every question you ask is quality.
Right. Either one of those things. It's like, we've got to work together on this shit.
Yeah.
And when we create these factions and we create this sort of caste system of the experts can't be questioned, it's like that's only setting up a recipe for disaster. Yeah. And so like that's sort of what I took away from a lot of this stuff, is like, you know what, you can call me a conspiracy theorist. Honestly, I kind of wear it as a badge of honor now, because I figured out a lot of shit and front ran a lot of quote unquote experts. And turns out 6 to 12 months later, I was actually right about this stuff. Yeah. Not because there's anything special about me, but just because like I tried to approach this from first principles, and I asked questions, and I wasn't biased towards any particular direction. I just really wanted to know the truth as best as I could figure it out.
When you say first principles, what do you mean? Because you didn't explain that.
Yeah, okay. So first principles is like, okay, I'll give you a perfect example of this. This is crazy. I hesitate. I don't want to go too far down the COVID rabbit hole, because like, I get like both sides. Like, I understand people's reaction on both sides of this, but this is a perfect example of how like I could not believe this when I read it. So this was actually This was an article that was posted in Wired magazine, of all places, in like the fall of 2021, and it was basically telling the story of, so in the early days of COVID, we'll never be able to post this video on YouTube, by the way. In the early days of COVID, there was this real pushback against calling it an airborne disease or airborne pathogen.
Yeah.
Because it's like, airborne means this specific thing. And if it's an airborne pathogen, or, you know, then we have to treat it in this specific way. And we're not going to do that because it doesn't, you know, these couple of characteristics are off. So, you know, we're going to treat it, we're going to take our whole public health approach and, you know, treat it as if it's not an airborne pathogen, right? And so when you go down that path of understanding why, it had something to do with the definition of what it meant to be airborne. And it's been so long since I've read this, but so I'm not going to get the numbers right, but it's like basically around like the size of the particle, and like COVID was 95, and like the classification required it to be like 25 or something along those lines, right? And so there was a researcher who was kind of an expert in like fluid dynamics and the way that air moves and understanding how like pathogens flow through them and stuff. And she started asking questions about this because there was evidence of it being transmitted in a way that looks like it's airborne.
Yeah.
But you know, WHO, CDC, they all had, you know, guidelines that said this is not airborne, right? And she started asking questions and got a lot of pushback on it. And then she came across a Chinese researcher that, you know, had done the same thing, you know, several years before her, that also got completely shut down and basically like excommunicated from the field. And she's like, okay, well, where does this come from? Right. So she starts looking at, okay, where does this 25 number come from? And she traces it back. It's cited in all these textbooks going back and back and back and back and back and back. And she can't find the source. Like, where did this come from? Until finally she was able to somehow trace like this like weird, obscure path into this study that was done by one person in, I believe, the 30s. And where they basically, I think they took like pigs or something and put them in like a chamber and had different particle sizes of tuberculosis, and then determined like what size it took to infect them as an airborne pathogen.
Okay.
And it was like 25. And that started. So everything on top of that over the decades, that became like, this is the number. This is what it takes to be airborne. So turns out that was a particularly sort of nasty version of tuberculosis that had to get like really embedded deep down in the lungs. So it required the 25. That doesn't mean all of them required 25. Right. So she brought this up. There was this huge fight to like get people to recognize, and finally, like after like a year of fighting this, it gets recognized like, oh yes, COVID is airborne and you can catch it, which means that like you can catch it through your eyes, you can catch it through an N95 mask, like you can catch it in like lots of ways, and we would have approached the whole thing differently. What does the WHO do? They don't come out with like this, trumpets. Hey, we were wrong. This is like they quietly, like put out either they just like quietly remove some things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember.
They changed it, right?
Yeah.
And
they tried to quietly. Everybody was like, they removed it.
Right. But the public health response didn't change, right?
Yeah.
Nothing else changed, right? And when it should have, right? And so this is what I mean by first principles. It's like asking the questions so you get back to the source of how a decision was made or where a piece of information came from, and looking at it and evaluating like, okay, was there anything that was missed here? And when I took this article and I posted it on Twitter, and which is probably a mistake, but one of the people that I know, responded and was like, well, science is a process, and it was sort of that same trope of like, science takes time, and I'm like, does it take 80 years? Like So what I said in that was like, the question that should be asked from this is, it's not, were we right or wrong about this? It's like, what else are we treating as scientific fact that is just scientific dogma?
Yeah, and it's just outdated. Like it's outdated data.
But it not only is it
like
outdated,
filtered.
It was built on a faulty premise.
Yeah.
But everything, and this is the thing about science, is like stuff gets built on top of other stuff until like, there's a foundation, and then scaffolding gets built on top of that. But when you realize that, hey, there's a crack in the foundation, everyone's like, no, don't look at that.
Yeah. We've already built all of this.
Right. We've already built this other stuff. And that's what I'm saying. Like there's so much structure and so much like legacy that goes into the scientific establishment that the way we think about science is like true discovery and asking questions. That to me is the essence of science, but it goes back to the conversation we had about the difference between spirituality and religion. It's like there's science and there's scientism, or the science, like in quotes, right?
Sure.
Where it's like the structures that get put around this, where the essence of science gets stifled because things like dogma and things like egos and things like legacy and positions and
power
and control get built around this, and it's hard to know if what you're actually hearing is a sound science versus what the establishment wants you to take away from it. And so, and also like it's hard to develop skills. Like it takes time and effort and like beating your head against the wall to like even start to develop skills that can even help you ask the right questions. And
sure.
And as like a layperson. And so it's just this weird disconnect. And I don't necessarily know how we sort of bring that divide together, but I think that part of that process is stop criticizing people for quote unquote doing their own homework,
Sure. Well, and I think there's also a flip side of that entire story with COVID too, which I think is worth mentioning, which is that, we were talking about like the potential dangers of having a post-truth era, right? And a post-truth world where like, I remember very clearly how many people were so loud about like when the WHO or when, the CDC came out and did change those things or they would alter anything. If they altered anything from what they originally came out with, so many people were like, they were wrong about that, so they're wrong about everything. We shouldn't listen to them at all. And how many people were like, COVID isn't real, so I'm not listening to you at all. And how many people were, I would hate to be on the other side of it, regardless of like the influence, trying to dictate public policy in terms of like how to handle it when everybody is screaming at you. We don't want to listen to you. We want to do it our own thing.
I would never want that job. No.
And one like, and there's, and how, regardless of like what the number is, because that's depending on where you look at this point, but like, so many people died because we didn't understand how it's transmitted. So many people died because we didn't understand what it was or how it worked or how we could fight it or
where
whatever.
it came from.
And so, yeah, that's a great conspiracy theory that I completely love entertaining. Where the fuck did it come from? How is it not a lab leak? Like, how is it not?
I mean, I think
too much.
It's all there's so much. There's a pile of evidence that just points to that.
Oh my God.
And if you want to get real conspiratorial,
you don't even have. Here's the thing: before you go there, you don't even have to go really deep to go. That's weird. So it came from Wuhan. Where is the center for the biggest lab in the world where they were like messing with coronaviruses and altering them?
This is a really good point because like that just seems like simple logic.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
But there was such a push of if you say that you're a racist or if you say that you're a conspiracy theorist, right? Or, like it was this weird narrative that got pushed. And when you like dig into like how that got pushed and like the implications that like Fauci and all his conspirators at the beginning that like published this paper that they clearly had, a conflict of interest in. Yeah. And, it's just for the longest time, at least a year and a half, it was like, you can't talk about this. This is a complete conspiracy theory. Like you're crazy for talking about this. Yeah. But it seems like just that one thing, like there's a ton of other stuff, but just that one thing of like the correlation of, maybe we should consider that, this was, maybe came from this lab and maybe you shouldn't put, the person who has, on our side that has the most vested interest in it not coming from the lab in charge of the WHO, investigation of the lab, it's just stuff like that.
Yeah, like that seems like 101 kind of situation.
But you can't question his motives or you can't question
and a lot of that too, though, like I think so many people fell into that mindset of not questioning because of how divisive just trying to keep people safe was, right? Like we didn't know how to keep people safe. We didn't know how to do it. Like I got COVID the first time while wearing a mask in a room of people that weren't wearing masks. And all of those people treated me poorly for wearing a mask, thought that I was an idiot, and purposely, I was working at a wedding at the time, I was still DJing at the time, and they were purposely coming up in my face and screaming their requests in my face. And they gave every single vendor COVID, and I think one of them died. So like it was insane, right? And then, and I went to the hospital. So it was like that was a whole thing. And I think that, and I just remember like at that point it was just like so personal and I was so mad. I was just so mad at the ignorance. It was like, who gives a shit? At that point, at least in the beginning, I was above the conversation of like the politicalness of it and the whole or the politics and the policy and like how do we keep people safe? I was like, why don't we all just stay away from each other until we find out what it is and figure out if it is actually serious or not? Like, obviously, some people are dying. I know a lot more people who have died from COVID than the flu. Remember that argument in the beginning? And so I was like, well, it's obviously killing a lot more people. So like maybe we should just settle down and not do anything with anyone for a little while. But everybody was so against it. And I was working in retail at the time. Oh my God. The amount of fights that I had with people who were like, I'm not wearing a mask and I'm coming in and I'm doing whatever I want to. And it's like, okay, we just won't take your money. You can grab all the things. And unless you're going to steal it and run out the door, you're screwed, and trying to get like the city to enforce that. And they were too afraid to enforce it because they were too afraid of what people would do in light of like being made to do anything. And so like, I don't know exactly how to have that conversation, but there is a conversation in terms of like, I think that's the danger of post-truth in some ways, right? Like if you question authority, which I think is rightfully so, and you should do a lot of the time, because most authority is authority in and of itself. Any human being who gets enough authority and enough power becomes corrupt. It just happens. Yeah. It's like I always go back to the Dark Knight. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right? Yeah. And so any of us, either me and you, if we got enough power and enough authority and enough money, we would probably become evil. Like I just don't know how. It's a question. It's a good philosophical conversation, but like I know myself, Well, I think that like money create like it amplifies who you actually are. So that is probably true. If you power is, I think, more than money. Money gives you power, but there's also other forms of power. Yeah. And I think that, and I agree with you. I think that I have a certain. Well, it also depends on how long you've had it. Is it generational power, generational wealth?
That's a good point.
You know, you're separated enough from humanity. There's people who have no idea what a gallon of milk costs, you know, like those people.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was such a hard time. And it was the COVID conversation, the COVID world was such a crazy time to try to believe or not believe anything.
Yeah, because it was just such conflicting messages from all over the place.
And while all that was happening, people were dying and we didn't know why.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was just like,
Yeah.
so everybody was pointing fingers at everyone and saying, and then some people were like, no one's dying, you know? It's like, so it was just so much
and then
gray area.
Like, I hate to say it, but you've got to ask the question of like, was that intentional?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe it was.
I think that there's at least a compelling case that it was. And, you know, I don't know how far down the conspiratorial rabbit hole we want to go, but like, you know, I think that there's at least enough what's the term, circumstantial evidence that it should be considered. Yeah. And like I don't have attachment to either one. At this point I don't really either. Yeah. I think it's more of a cautionary tale of in a grand scheme of things of how people react to things and how people react. It's weird how often people the thing about it is it's like, you know, I love this conspiracy theory. This is a great one that Bill Gates is tracking you and putting a chip in the vaccine. Yeah. You know, that's a really great example of conspiracy theory focused on the wrong things. Yeah. They were asking the right questions, focusing on the right things while ignoring the fact that whoever wants to track you is already tracking you. Exactly. You just texted that you posted that post about Bill Gates on your phone. Right. And like it's such a dumb thing, but like how many they have way cheaper ways to track you already.
Right. And they've already got all the data they ever need on you. And so it's like that was the dumbest like argument for not taking a vaccine.
But that was one that got highlighted in like newsreels and stuff, right? And tearing down 5G towers and shit like that.
But it also worked. It made a lot of people. I personally heard people making that argument, and I was like, people have known my entire life, and I was like, I would just look at them like, are you dumb? Like how do you believe that and not believe that they already did it a long time ago? Like you were already tracked a long time ago, and you know it's just crazy. But so you know, I think that's a good example of like, I don't know if it's a good example, but it is a example of getting off in the weeds by asking maybe the right questions in the wrong context or the wrong questions in. Maybe in the wrong way. You know, it's like I don't know. It's again processing in real time. I will think of so many things in like 3 days that I'm like, oh, this is what I should have said, or this is what I meant. True. But yeah, I don't know. All of those points are valid points to consider in this conversation, one way or another. Maybe just not at this time. Right. Yeah.
My question is, what constitutes a conspiracy theory? What is the actual definition of that? Is that a very Fives thing of me to say, where I want to define everything and know like the standard and the parameters of what we're talking about? If we're talking about classic conspiracy theories, I'm intrigued by them. I wonder about them, but I'm not going to go out of my way to research them too much. Some people take more stock than I do in some of these classic ones like aliens, UFOs, and Area 51. I am very intrigued by the Kennedy assassination because that one is touched upon in film and television and books the most out of anything I have ever heard of. And these days, you know, I would not be surprised at all if it were an inside job by the FBI to take him out. And it's just it was a little too easy for Lee Harvey Oswald, I have to say. My brother is really into that one, so I happen to know just a little bit more information. But I haven't been putting on my tinfoil hat or, you know, listening to the secret AM radio signals. But it's a little fun to think about things that are a little mysterious.
I want to go back to, we have this is sort of this double-edged sword, right? Where we're curious, we ask questions, we challenge authority.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have this intense fear of being seen as incompetent. And so I feel like that can be a blind spot for us if we're not doing things. And it doesn't have to be what I talked about. That's probably not going to work for most people. I don't know. But like if we're not doing things that are constantly like breaking down our models, and so that we can rebuild them, because like the reality is like a weak model will fall apart on its own over time, but it's our attachment to them that holds it together when it's a weak model. You know what I mean?
Right, and isolation only further amplifies that attachment.
Exactly.
And this can be in anything. Like, it could be the way that it's the narratives we tell ourselves, right? It's the story that's constantly going on in our head about ourselves, our own like reflection of ego, and that we're incompetent. Like the fact that I was having a conversation today about how this whole time I've been trying to, my entire life I've always thought I needed somebody else to do professional music. And it wasn't until I did this podcast, which I've talked about this multiple times, how many times this is like rewritten the story that's in my head about myself, and how I've had to constantly break down my own models of self and what I am capable of as a human being. That it wasn't until that I let myself just like fully, like when I obsessed over trying to get the live stream. Remember we had talked about that seasons ago? Yeah. And I just lost myself for 2 weeks trying to figure out the problems of it. Well, I did this in a more constructive way these days, and I figured out like, oh my God, there's this mic that no one talks about and is such a great mic, and it's like competing with all these better mics. So let me see if I can get this one. And I tried some different things, tweaked some things, and then I swear to God, the other day I was listening to something I recorded here that was just acoustic, but I put it up against everything that I had released in the past, and it's 1,000 times better quality. Then I put it up against stuff that has been released by other independent artists that are selling millions of copies, and I was like, as a perfectionist, this is just as good, if not better, than what they do. And so I've kind of reworked my model at this point of like what I'm going to release and how I'm going to do it. And so it literally like completely changed the way that I'm moving forward in the thing that I'm the most passionate about, because I'm no longer thinking of myself as someone who is incompetent or unable to do something. It's just like, it just takes time. It takes the capacity to dig in and let yourself be wrong enough times to figure out what is right and what is, and so like I think that can be applied to all things. It doesn't have to be conspiracy theories. It's maybe that's the thing to take away from this conversation. I don't know how we land the plane on this conversation. But yeah, that's what stuck out to me thinking about it in terms of like just when you were talking. It's like this can be applied to so many things that fives often, I would imagine, struggle with, and I've struggled with, where it's like we get so caught up in the way that we think something should be done, and then we decide if we can or can't do that thing, and then it paralyzes us and we can't do anything.
Yeah, dude. There was a quote from, I was watching this podcast with Gabor Mate earlier today, and he basically said that crabs can't grow inside of their shells, right?
Right.
Because of the heart. Now the shell protects them. Yeah. But they hit a point where they can't grow, and then they've got to go find another shell. Yeah. Right. Like hermit crabs, right? Sure. And that means that in order to grow, you have to become vulnerable, and vulnerability is the capacity to be wounded. And so many of us are so afraid of that we never deconstruct those models, because the model is the structure that we build up, right that helps in our heads like protect us from whatever it is that we're trying to avoid in terms of being wounded, right? And when we break those down, all of a sudden we're vulnerable, and it's a scary feeling, and that's why most people don't want to do that. But like if we can condition ourselves to getting more comfortable with that ability, whether it's like believing in conspiracy theories or it's creating music, whatever, right? When we can overcome that fear, that's where we'll start to see our world expand and our minds expand and our spiritual growth happen and all of that. Yeah. And like I think that is the big thing that I want us to take away from this episode, is that we have this capacity, and this is almost a continuation from our UFO episode, right? Like we have this capacity to be intensely curious. And that's such a gift in the world. And we have this ability to ask these questions and dig into things and try to find the essence of reality and seek truth. And so as long as we can figure out how to be courageous enough to be vulnerable and be vulnerable to being wrong at times, right? Then we can override that instinct to attach to models or not break down models, and we can experience that exponential growth that we want to see. So if you are interested in trying my new girl method, a great place to start. There's a
seminar in 2 weeks.
No. There's this awesome channel on YouTube called Wendigoon, and I'll link it up in the show notes. And he has this like, it's 9 hours if you go through the whole thing.
Oh my God.
It took me several days, but he calls it the conspiracy theory iceberg, where he takes like a couple hundred conspiracy theories at different levels and just like briefly talks over it. And like the ones that are interesting, he'll dig into a little bit more. But just to give you a primer of like what all is out there, there's some crazy ones and they're so cool. Yeah. So it's fun. You can at least like get a good bird's eye view, and you can find the ones that interest you the most and then start digging into them. So question shit and go down some YouTube rabbit trails.
Fuck the patriarchy. I don't know.
I don't know how to end this now. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, it's Cody, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to this episode. I also want to give a special thanks to our community members who shared their voice with us. If you enjoyed this episode and you're the type of person who likes helping others, would you do us a favor and share it with other people like you? If you found value in this conversation, they will too. If anything in this conversation has resonated with you, or if you have any further thoughts or questions, I want to invite you to join our community of other people like you and continue the conversation at Enneagram5.com.